Hi, welcome to this episode of Dungeon Dives where we'll be covering Tempest Keep. Check down below for a specific part you might be looking for, let's go. Before we enter the raid, first we're going to need to get attuned. First, we'll need to do a quest chain which starts here in Shadowmoon Valley and is picked up here for Horde and here for Alliance, and the first quest is called Hand of Gul'dan. You'll then do a long quest chain that is pretty self-explanatory. Then you'll go to Shat and talk to Khadgar, then run Shattered Halls Heroic, then run Steam Vault and Shadow Labyrinth Heroic, then run Alcatraz Heroic, and finally, go kill Magtheridon.
Take my and choke on it!
Now you are attuned to Tempest Keep. Welcome to the Keep. Fair warning, some of the trash in this raid is just as, if not, more difficult than some of the bosses, and we're gonna need lots and lots of CC coordination. Like, you'll need it for this first pack here that greets you when you enter the raid. Bloodwater Legionnaires are going to need to be tanked away from everyone else because they do a nasty whirlwind. Star Scryers are going to mind control players and do an instant cast AoE. Astromancers will also do a raid-wide AoE. Bloodwater Vindicators will heal, they'll also dispel effects on friendly targets, and they will stun players. In summary, LOSing and CCing mobs will be very important for most packs in this raid. And clear all the trash and we can face the first boss, Alar. When you pull Alar, she will always land on the left platform. During phase 1, Alar cannot move from the place she lands. A tank will always need to be in melee range. If her target is not in melee range, she will spam cast Flame Buffet, which will quickly wipe your raid if casted multiple times. After 30 seconds, Alar will fly back up into the air and land on the next platform, which is always done in a clockwise pattern. It's very important you have another tank waiting here to pick up threat because of that Flame Buffet spell. When Alar flies away from a platform, an Ember of Alar ad will spawn. You'll want a party of players to stay down in the middle of the room and kill these ads. They don't have a lot of health, but they explode on death, so melee DPS need to be careful. Periodically during this phase, Alar will fly up into the center of the room and cast Flame Quills. This does AoE damage to anyone on the upper platforms, so everyone in your raid is going to need to jump down to the middle. After she is done casting this, Alar will either land on the first or fourth platform. Have your two tanks stand at the base of the ramps, anticipating for Alar to land close to them. Again, it's very important, tanks close the gap and get in melee range of Alar as soon as possible because of that Flame Buffet spell. Once Alar reaches 0% health, phase 2 will start and she will respawn in the center of the room and do AoE damage around her. During this phase, flame patches will spawn on the ground that you should not stand in. She will also cast a melt armor debuff on your tank every 60 seconds, so it's very important you have an off tank pick her up. Most importantly, Alar will cast Airborne, and she'll fly up into the air and dive bomb a random player. Have everyone in your raid stay spread, and move away if you are where Alar is going to stand. This will deal AoE damage and 2 Ember ads will spawn. I've seen some raids kill these ads, and I've also seen other raids just have an off tank round them up, and the rest of the raid just focuses down Alar. It's up to you, and either way, the boss should be dead. On our way to the next boss, we'll run into these Crystal Core Sentinels. They cast an overcharged arcane explosion spell that takes 4 seconds to cast, but deals massive AoE damage around it. In the Void Reaver boss room, there's even more annoying trash. Crystal Core mechanics will heal the robots they are with, and they'll also throw saw blades, which do a cone AoE. It's highly recommended you have the Warlocks banish these demons. Tempest Smiths will buff the robots. They'll also throw bombs that stun people, and throw bombs that reduce armor. Polymorph them. Lastly, we got the Crystal Core Devastators, which have a knockback, so face them against a wall. They also can interrupt spellcasts. Kill all of the trash in this room, and then we can face the Void Reaver.
Alert! You are marked for extermination.
The Void Reaver is probably the simplest fight in this raid. Tank him in the center of the room, and have the ranged in your raid spread out around him. You are going to need 3 tanks generating threat on this boss because he will regularly cast knockback, which reduces the threat of his current target, and he is immune to taunt. Next he will cast Pound, which does melee range AoE, and lastly he will cast Arcane Orb, which is an orb fired at a random range target's location. These players just need to be quick and get out of the way, and yep, that's the boss. Pretty simple.
Systems shutting down.
On the way to the next boss, you'll face many of the same trash mobs we have already discussed before, but there will also be these very large packs of novices that should be gathered up and quickly AoE'd down. Clear out all of the packs in this room, and we can face High Astromancer
Tal alumen nos indorai!
First and foremost, it's recommended that you might want some arcane resistance for this fight. The first ability this boss will cast is Arcane Missiles on a random target that deals big damage. Next, she'll cast Blinding Light, which does AoE raid-wide damage. But here's where the fight gets interesting. She will also cast Wrath of the Astromancer on a random ranged target. This is going to make the target turn blue, and they will take increased damage from arcane spells. After 7 seconds, this debuff will transfer to the nearest targets. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to have the person with the debuff run out of the raid, and then have another player stand near them to soak up the debuff so it doesn't get spread to multiple players. The player that originally had the debuff should then run closer to the boss so they don't get it again. The trick is you want to spread this debuff evenly among your players so someone isn't taking massively increased arcane damage. What's weird is that in pretty much all of the guides you'll find on this boss, Wrath of the Astromancer does something totally different, but this is the version we got on the PTR. If for some reason this spell changes, it will be the version where it's pretty much just a Baron-Geddon bomb from Molten Core. Okay, so anyways, every 50 seconds the boss will disappear and a bunch of adds will spawn that you'll need to AoE down. After 15 seconds, she will appear again with 2 priest adds that you need to kill. At 20%, the boss will turn into a Voidwalker, but really this is the easiest part of the fight. It's pretty much just a tank and spank, and she should be dead.
The warmth of the sun awaits.
Energy. Power. My people are addicted to it. A dependence made manifest after the Sunwell was destroyed. Welcome to the future. A pity you are too late to stop it. No one can stop me now. Salama Ashalanore.
During Phase 1 of Kael'thas, you will fight each of his advisors one at a time. The location at which these bosses die is very important because they will be resurrected in a later phase. First, you'll face Thaladred. He fixates on random players and they'll need to run away. Melee DPS should not try and deal any damage to this boss, and you should try and kill him in the back of the room. Next is Sanguinar, who is a simple tank and spank boss, but he also does a 30-yard AoE fear. Kill him in the corner of the room over here. Next is the Mage. This is another boss that melee DPS cannot attack because if anyone gets in melee range, she will just spam cast Arcane Explosion. This is another one of those bosses that should be tanked by a Warlock, spamming Searing Pain. Everyone in the raid should also stay spread because of her Conflagration ability that will stun and deal damage to a player and everyone that surrounds them. Lastly, she'll cast Fireball and she will die exactly where she spawned. Our final advisor is the Engineer. He has a debuff he will place on a random player that will periodically stun them over the course of 60 seconds. This could prove to be fatal for a tank, so if they get this debuff, you might want to just stop DPS before transitioning into the next phase. This boss should die right next to Sanguinar. During Phase 2, a bunch of floating hostile weapons will spawn. There are 7 in total. You're going to need to group up all of the weapons and AoE them down except for 2. One of them is the Devastator, the two-handed axe, which should be tanked slightly outside of the group because of its whirlwind ability. Next is the Nether Strand Bow, which has a multi-shot ability that you don't want face towards your raid, so instead, you're going to want a hunter to stand off on the sidelines and tank it instead. Like I said, we are going to AoE down the rest of the weapons, but also make sure you interrupt their casts as well. Once all of the weapons are dead, everyone in your raid will be able to loot them as legendary weapons that can be used for the rest of the fight. The weapons that you're supposed to use are pretty self-explanatory, depending on your class and spec. Casters get the staff, healers get the mace, hunters get the bow, tanks get the sword and shield, etc, etc. After all the weapons are dead and everyone grabs one, stack up and wait for Phase 3, where things get interesting. All of the advisors are going to be rezzed all at the same time. So you'll have one tank holding Sanguinar, another tank holding the Engineer, and a Warlock holding the Mage. Thaladred will be running after random players and should be the first priority for the ranged in your group, and the melee should be focusing on Sanguinar. After Thaladred is dead, the casters will help kill Sanguinar. Then after he is dead, the casters will switch to Capernaum, and the melee will focus down Telnicus. Look, I can't say these elf names, dude. The hardest part of this phase are those first couple of seconds where everyone is just running around to get to their assignments, but after the first two bosses are down, it becomes pretty easy. And all of these bosses are going to need to die within 3 minutes, because then Kael'thas will enter the fight. Have all of your ranged players stacked together. Random players will get mind controlled. This mind control can be broken by other players who have the Infinity Blade legendary equipped, and they just need to poke the affected players. Flame strikes will spawn on the ground, indicated by this swirly magical spell. Don't stand in it. A phoenix will be summoned that does hellfire-like AoE around it, that deals AoE damage, but also damages itself. You'll want ranged DPS or a tank to kite it around the outside of the group. And don't be afraid to throw up some dots on it as well. And when the phoenix dies, it will summon an egg. All of the DPS in your raid should focus down these eggs, because if you don't, after 15 seconds, the phoenix will respawn from the egg. Lastly for this phase, let's talk about Kael'thas' abilities. He will cast a fireball that should be interrupted, and every minute he's going to do a sequence of spells where he'll throw up a damage absorption barrier on himself and start casting Pyroblast. In order to interrupt the Pyroblast, you're going to need to kill the barrier around him. So either your DPS need to have some high damage to destroy the barrier quickly, or your tanks need to absorb the Pyroblast, which is possible if they use the ability on their legendary shield. The catch is he will cast Pyroblast multiple times in a row, so eventually you're going to need to break the barrier and interrupt those casts. Lastly, Kael'thas will also cast Arcane Disruption, which deals raid-wide AoE damage. At 50% health, Kael'thas will do a bunch of RP, and then you'll start the final phase. During this phase, he will cast Gravity Lapse. All of the players are going to be teleported towards him and thrown up into the air. Immediately after you get thrown up into the air, your whole raid needs to spread out as fast as possible. This is because Kael'thas will cast Nether Beam, which chains to other players that are close to you, kinda like Cthulhu's Beam from Encourage. There will also be these black clouds in the sky. Don't get close to them, because if you do, it's going to put a debuff on you that reduces your maximum health by 10%, and it stacks. Melee DPS, you should not even attempt to attack the boss while everyone is flying in the air. And after those 30 seconds are up, make sure you're not too high up in the air, because you might fall to your death and break your legs. Other than that, this phase is very similar to the previous phase, except he won't cast Mind Control. You'll still want to kite those phoenixes around, but some groups choose to ignore dealing damage to them and just focus down the boss. At the end of the day, this boss fight is going to take multiple attempts, and having proper, well-organized raid leadership is going to be your pathway to success, and the Lord of the Blood Elves should be defeated.
For Kael'thas!
That's the end of the video. If you found it helpful, share it with a guildmate so they don't play like an idiot. Okay, thanks.